welcome back to the channel, guys. And today we're going to be working through a pre-purchase inspection on this beautiful 2008 430 Spider. So I'm going to finish up on this road test. I'll see you guys back in the shop here in a second. Well, we are back from a road test. Now we can get a good look at this 2008 F430 Spider that we have in the shop today. And this thing so far is looking exceptionally clean, although I've barely just peeked at it. So we can see pretty standard black interior, F1 car. It's a Spider. This car is a 2008. It does have carbon ceramics, which is optional on the 430s. Not all of them come with carbon ceramic brakes, which is good. It is a factory Scuderia Shield car, so you can see that they're embossed into the fender. And black, man, I can tell you as an owner of a black car, that is a hard paint color to keep clean, looking good. And this thing looks exceptional. I don't really see any rock chips. I don't see any big scratches or swirls. It really is a pretty clean car. Mileage-wise, this car is about 18,000 miles, I do believe. It came out of the East Coast, so this is really the first time I've seen it. And this is the owner's first 430. And so far, like I mentioned, from my initial looks, this car is looking really nice. Quite clean. Everything looks in pretty good shape. I did already take a peek in the interior. Obviously, when we're driving the car, there is a few items that are sticky in the interior. Big surprise. So that's not a major deal, and honestly, that's something that I expect to find on a 430. Unless the previous owner fully committed and went all in, and has paid to have everything removed and all the sticky no more taken care of, I expect to find that on a car. So I would consider that standard. So today we're going to be working through a PPI on this F430. So really in this case it's a post-purchase inspection, but really it's no different than my pre-purchase inspections, other than the fact that the client has already purchased the car. Now, it's obviously an ideal situation to have this inspection done before you commit on your deal and you purchase your car. However, this client purchased this car from East Coast, and it's not really feasible to have me do the inspection in that situation. And the car was actually at a dealer, but it wasn't a Ferrari dealer. So I will say, if you're going to have a pre-purchase inspection done on a Ferrari, you should have a Ferrari mechanic look at the car. There's a lot of unique things about these cars that most mechanics may not be able to spot or be aware of. So it's worth your money to have an actual Ferrari mechanic that knows these cars, look at them. And I will say, I'm a big believer in PPIs, but if you're buying a car from a dealer, I do believe that the PPI should be done from an independent third party, even if it's a Ferrari dealership. I say this because any dealer is going to have a vested interest in making sure that car is in perfect condition or possibly potentially overlooking some problems on the car. I'm not saying that's what all dealers do. I'm not saying that at all. There's plenty of honest, good dealers out there that will give you an accurate inspection on the car. I'm just saying that you have to recognize that they have a vested interest to potentially turn the cheek. And when you're investing this much on a car, that's something that you definitely don't want. So you want an independent third party to give the car a look over, which in this case is me in this car, because I have no skin in the game on this car if this car turns out being a fantastic car or if it has a lot of problems. I can tell you from my initial look over of the car and driving it, I don't expect to find a whole lot on this car. Might find 2 or 3 things on it, but overall, so far, early indications, it's a good buy. So, I will say, my PPIs, they're going to be probably more in-depth than a lot of other people's. So we're going to be working through, obviously, the basic inspections with the suspension, ball joints, condition of bushing, shocks, checking for oil leaks, tires, brakes, the normal, right? The normal lot. But I do deviate. So this customer did choose to have me run through a compression test. So we're going to run through, get the compression test done. I'm also going to run emissions tests on the car. We're going to smoke test the exhaust system. And on 430s, I also smoke test the intake system, because having the intake gaskets either fail or blow out is a very common problem. So that smoke test is going to help us identify those things. So like I said, there's other checks that I do. Those are just some of the big ones that we're talking about. We're going to hook our scan tool up, get the whole car scanned, read for faults and errors, check clutch wear, check CCM wear. So you can see that it's not just a quick visual, not a 101 checklist. My goal is to check every mechanical and cosmetic and functional item on this car, assess its operation, its condition, and really just get a strong baseline on this car of the condition that it's in now. Advise the client if there's anything that we need to do to get the car to his standards. And really from that point, once we know the condition of the car and we have it at the level that the client wants, it's really just the periodic inspections that we do during the annual services where we're going to look over the car and make sure that nothing has changed from this PPI. So this PPI is critical, in my opinion, on documentation with photos, video, documenting our compression, faults, any of that stuff, because for as long as this client owns this car and as long as he chooses for me to service this car, all the information that we're going to be capturing today is going to be the baseline for any changes we see on the car down the road. So even though this video is covering the PPI on this 430, it's essentially going to be an excellent resource for a 430's buyer's guide. Meaning I'm going to cover and inspect and talk about the key items that are either common to fail on a 430 or the repair cost is incredibly expensive. So these are some of the key items that are very specific to these cars that you want to be aware of. So if you're looking to purchase a 430, these are some of the key items that you want to be aware of, you want to inspect, and you also just want to know that these are potential failure points on the car. Alright, so here's my plan for today's video. I'm going to work through the basic parts of this inspection, so the real easy stuff, checking my lights, the heater, the horn, wipers, simple stuff, documenting my tire dot dates, brake wear. You guys get the gist. So I'm going to work through all that real boring, easy stuff. I'm going to work to get the car up on the rack. I'll get all the under trays off, all my engine bay trims off. I'll probably pull the wheels. Once we get to that point, I'll bring you guys back. I will show you and talk about what I found during the first stage of my inspection, and then I'll keep you guys around while we work through doing the compression test, all of our smoke tests, our emissions tests, all the more detailed specific items. And at that time, we're also going to walk through the car on the specific areas that you want to keep an eye of when you're looking to buy or just purchase a 430, on common failures, wear items, and just things that you need to be aware of. So I'm going to jump into the inspection, and I'll see you guys back here in a second. Well, good morning. It's a new day and the same inspection on this F430. So yesterday afternoon, we took the car on the road test. I got it in here, got all of the under trays, engine bay shields, really all of the coverings off of the car, and I completed essentially my entire inspection, or the really basic elements of the inspection. So today that leaves all the kind of specialized and specific items that we need to cover on this inspection for the car. Now, I will say, as you can see, that I have the wheels off the car. I have all the engine bay trim out of the car. I have my coolant pressure tester on. I left that on overnight to make sure there's no coolant leaks. But one thing that's worth talking about here is you have to be very strategic, or a specific order on when you take everything off the car, especially, say, the wheels and tires. Because you can see that we have the under tray of the car up here leaning on my truck, and this right here is the lift point on a 430, and if you notice, it's completely encapsulated. So some dealers did cut these to gain access so you can get these under trays off without moving the lift arms. This one's a virgin under tray, so with this lasting nearly 20 years uncut, I'm not a fan of cutting them. It's really not that cumbersome to work around this problem. I can see why they cut them in the dealerships, because when the 430 first came out, this was new, and it's a minor inconvenience. But I can say from all the later cars, 458, 488, F8, everything after that, it got even worse, and there's no way around it. So, you know, that's 2020 hindsight. They didn't know that the problem was going to get even worse, because on those cars, they moved this hole further in. So I'm saying that because you need to leave the wheels on the car to get the under tray off. So I have to loosen all the hardware for this under tray. Then I have to lower the car down on the wheels to take the lift arms out from underneath the car, remove the last of the hardware, slide the under tray off, put the lift arms back on, then raise the car. Then I can take the wheels off. If I took the wheels off ahead of time, there's no easy way to get the lift arms out, and you're kind of hosed, and you got to put the wheels back on. So it's a little bit of an inconvenience, mild annoyance, but if you're thoughtful and strategic on your sequence of events, it's pretty easy to work around. So where we're going to start at today, you can see I have the car on, the ignition's on, stabilize power supply onto the car. And one of the key things you want to do during an inspection or have done is really read the ECU data and faults out of the car. So I'm fortunate that I have a Leonardo tester here, which is pretty much the best that you can get for aftermarket Ferrari scan tools. Ferrari scan tools is a whole nother subject, but the factory tools they don't backdate essentially. So the newest Ferrari scan tool does not backdate to the older cars. So in order to equip yourself with all of the factory Ferrari scan tools, you would have to buy at least 4 different tools, and they're all about probably 20 grand a pop. So a Leonardo is a significant investment, but it does give me coverage all the way from current all the way back to 348. So this is the only tester that will cover everything in the Ferrari world. I will say that this is probably more attainable for most people at home. This is an Autel MP808. And this does have Ferrari coverage, although it does have limitations. It does talk to the 430. We'll cover this in a little bit, but it's not ideal. I also have another option here, which I think is a Think Diag, which is essentially just a dongle. You download the software, you can put it on a tablet or your phone, and we'll talk about those in a second. But because I move through so many of these cars and I'm always working on them, I invested on a Leonardo, and I can tell you that this gives me factory level coverage and information that I can trust. So we're going to hop in here and go in and get this car scanned. And fortunately, the Leonardo has an advantage over the factory tool, because the factory tool doesn't do a generic all-in-one scan, where the Leonardo, I can essentially hit that button, do a quick test, and it's going to run through the entire car. So the factory scan tool on a 430 would be an SD3, and an SD3 I'd have to go in individually and read out the faults out of each individual ECU and parameters. So it's a little bit cumbersome. However, this just makes it a lot easier. So it's going to run through, and is what we're looking for is just checking for any errors or faults. And I will say I've already gone through and scanned this car, so I know it's there, but I did not delete anything. And there's really nothing alarming. There's all what I would call phantom faults, voltage related faults from the car sitting, being transported and sold, which is all pretty typical. So as part of my inspection, as I document the faults that the car came in with, we're obviously going to clear them, return them to the customer. That way, if the car comes back and starts having a problem that seems persistent, I can reference back to the faults that the car came with, see if any of them are the same, and maybe, okay, maybe that is actually a problem that we need to address in the car. So we'll let this finish scanning up real quick, and then I'm going to drop you guys in and show you a couple key things that you want to be looking at while you're reading this information. Okay, so I got this set up here, and you can see that I have faults in my convertible top system, the instrument cluster, my E-diff, suspension module, and the right-hand bank ECU. Now, one thing to keep in mind that a 430 runs 2 ECUs. There's also a left-hand bank, but it did not auto-populate. I have to go in and manually scan that. But when you're checking these, you want to go in and check errors out of both ECUs just to make sure that there's no check engine lights or pending issues, or that your additive or multiplicative values aren't going towards max. So back out from here. So here I can go into everything individually, and a couple of the key things you want to look at, I think probably the first and foremost is our gearbox. So this is probably the biggest thing on these cars, are the clutches and clutch wear. So we're going to go in the parameters. Actually, I'll show you. We can go in the errors first. So there's no errors in there. Go in the parameters, which are going to read real-time values, and give me a second here to select everything. Okay, so I got this set up for the parameters that we want to read, so we can talk about this, because this is probably one of the most critical parts when you're purchasing or looking to have a 430 inspected. and that's ultimately our clutch wear. So you can see that this is saying our clutch wear is at 37%, but that doesn't tell the whole story. What you really need to pay attention to is the clutch position from new, so the closed clutch position from new. Right now you can see that it's reading at 16.8 millimeters, and then you need to reference that to our current clutch position, which is 18.9 millimeters. This number right here is reset when you install a new clutch. So what I'm about to cover pretty much covers any Ferrari with an F1 system, and this is critical when you're purchasing a car or just doing an inspection on a car, because this information we're going to cover can be modified to make it look better than it actually is, and I'll show you how. So we're going to jump in and we can see, oh, come back, our clutch position closed from new at 16.81 millimeters, okay? So essentially that's telling us where the clutch pressure plate was at when the clutch was first installed into the car. Now if we jump down here and we're looking at our current position, which is 18.91, it's dancing around just a little bit, that's telling us the exact same measurement, but where it's currently at. So a new clutch should be between 16 to 18 millimeters. Generally, they're around 16 and a half. That's pretty much where they're at. Let's say I installed a brand new clutch in this car and it's 16.5 millimeters, and if this car is brand new, this number will read 16.5 millimeters. You can tell that my 37% clutch wear pretty much adds up because I have such a deviation from when the clutch was installed new to where the clutch is currently at. Is what happens, a lot of times people go to trade a car in, they're going to have a clutch that's worn 80-90%. We can use this Leonardo, and I can actually take this number right here. I can change this number if I wanted to, the 18.91%, reset it. That's going to show 0% of my clutch wear, but it did nothing other than just change the clutch wear on the car. So you can manipulate that number and make it look like the car doesn't have very much clutch wear at all, but in reality it does. So reading the clutch wear percentage is important, but you need to take into account your number from a new clutch to your current clutch. Now, I will say that that number does change a little bit depending on the car. If you're working on a 360, a 430, a 599, 612, depending on the car, that number will be a little bit different. So you have to do a little bit of research to find out what number you need for the specific car you're looking at. But that is one very important thing that you want to check on. Now, while we're on the subject, we will come back in a second. I will show you. I can tell you that this tester, wildly inaccurate. So this seems on the surface that it has all the access and information that we need, but when you go to read the clutch data out of it, it's not even close to being accurate. I did find that this Think Diag is a little bit better. Again, at the end, I'll hook these up and show you guys that. So that's one of the main things you want to look at and make sure is good. Now another thing, if you do have access, is since this car is an 08 and it's a carbon ceramic car, you're going to want to jump in, and in the instrument cluster is where we store the brake wear data. So again, we're going to jump in and go to parameters, find our needed parameter here. There we go. So that's another one right there, is you want to jump in and read the wear of the brake discs, and want to be sure that that's not too high and they're not getting worn out, because if the car is seeing a lot of track time, there is a good chance that the brake discs could be worn out, and that's obviously a very expensive repair to get those replaced. Now, if the car has only lived on the street, I can tell you that I've never seen a car only driven on the street to this date that needed rotors. Any car that I've ever put rotors on saw extensive track time. So it really just depends on the use of the car. Once we go over what I found on the car and what to look for, I'll show you some things and a little bit of insight on the brake rotors, so you kind of know what you're looking for visually if you don't have access to read the brake wear out. With these carbon ceramic rotors, it's not like a steel rotor where you measure the thickness. It's a completely different setup. So again, you just want to be sure that you get that stuff read out. And this is just a few of the things that you want to be looking for in addition to your basic faults and information that you're pulling from the car. So those are probably the two main things that you really want to look at in depth, on top of just your general faults in the car. Depending on the access you have, if you can have parameters of how the engine's running at idle, which is reading out what the sensors are showing live, that's good data to have. You know, it shows your additive values or multiplicative values. So it's really just how detailed you want to capture everything. Again, we're trying to establish a baseline for how this car is when it came in. So that way, say, in a year, the car comes in with a misfire, or let's say a fuel trim fault, I can reference back to this information that I have, and it kind of gives me a good baseline because I knew the car was running good when it came in. So I've already captured everything I need with this tester. I'm going to get this disconnected from the car, and I'm going to show you guys real quick these other generic testers here, these more common units, and we're going to go back into the clutch information and I'll show you how they're not accurate. Alright, so I got it scanned in with the Autel. One thing worth noting, when I scanned it in as a 2008 Spider, it did not recognize any of the parameters in the gearbox ECU. I had to go in and scan it as a 2008 Coupe, and I was able to get into it. It is the correct software function, which is a CF301. But now in here you can see that our focus, get this thing to focus, our closed clutch position is the same as what the Leonardo told us. Also, our current, or the position from new, is the same as what the Leonardo told us. But you can see right here, 0% clutch wear. So we can see that there's a deviation from those two numbers, but this isn't calculating the clutch wear correctly. So that's where, if you're using the wrong tool and you're unaware, you could think that this has 0% clutch wear, and really the car does have 37% clutch wear, not 0%. This is giving us a false reading. So be cautious with that, because that is inaccurate information to go off of, and we can identify that it does have clutch wear based on the position from new to the current position. In order for that to have 0% clutch wear, the current position would have to be the same as the new position. And I'd be weary if you have a new position of really, you get into the 18, anything really getting in the 17 and a half and up, I'd be weary, and I would definitely question that reading. I'm going to jump over, get this one hooked up, we're going to scan it, do the same thing, and see what it says. Okay, so with a Think Diag setup, it's showing the same as the Leonardo. We're showing a current clutch position of 18.89. When installed new, 16.8, and the same wear, 37.26. Okay, so my whole point of doing that was to highlight the fact that you have to be cautious with what you're scanning the car with, and also, even though it may read it and show you numbers, you need to know what you're looking at, or who you're having do the inspection of the car needs to understand those numbers so they can see if they've been manipulated or if it's actually a true reading. Now, I probably can make a dedicated video just talking about scan tools for Ferrari, and it's a very commonly asked question. I'm not going to get too deep in it here, but I'll hit it and highlight it real quick. This Autel, what is it again? MP808 BT. So that's just the Bluetooth feature on this. This is, from my research, the most inexpensive Autel tester you can get that has the full Ferrari software package on it. So this does say that it operates all the way back to 355 with specific 355 software. I can tell you it does not. It will do a generic OBD2 scan, but it will not go into the specific Ferrari software, even though there is an option. As we saw, this showed the wrong clutch wear on this 430. I can also tell you that this does not scan all of the ECUs. It just doesn't recognize them or communicate with them. So this is pretty decent, but for the price you're paying for $800 to $1,000, leaves a lot there to be desired. Now, we can see that this is the Think Diag from ThinkCar, and all you purchase is this dongle. I think it's like $99. You download the software on your phone or a tablet, and as we just saw, this is far more accurate, and I've actually had better results with this than the Autel. At $99, that's an easy price point for anyone that has a car that wants to scan codes. This does give access to most of the ECUs, but it doesn't give full coverage to the 430. I haven't had a lot of opportunity to get this on a lot of different cars. I have had it on a 355 as well. Similar to the Autel, it has specific software in it for a 355. It does not communicate. It only goes in the generic OBD2 scan and will communicate. Now I will say on the 355, I did try that on the OBD2 port and on the ISO line, the 3-pin connector at the ECU with an adapter, same results. And then you can clearly see, you go to the extreme end of the spectrum with the Leonardo, that gives me full dealer level access where I have access to all the control units, all the information. However, the price point on this is astronomical, so not an option for just an avid enthusiast at home. That's pretty much somebody that is going to be working on these cars day in and day out full time. That's what this is for. So with all the ECU checks out of the way, one of the next things we need to check is one of the big problems on 430s, and that's the exhaust system, specifically the exhaust manifolds or headers. Now, it's very common that they crack and fail, but they just don't crack and fail. A lot of the times, the studs that hold them to the head will snap off and the whole manifold will warp and pull away, and then you just have a leak from the manifold to the head. Other times, it's actually the pipe failure within the manifolds themselves. So having these repaired is actually quite expensive. So on top of a clutch, the manifolds are definitely something you want specifically checked when you're doing a pre-purchase inspection, because you want to be sure that you're not going to have to deal with that expense right away. Now, the method to checking those is with a smoke machine, so I have that set up. Now, a lot of the older Ferraris actually have an emissions test port pre-catalytic converter up on the headers, and that allows us to go in and do the test right there. It also allows us to sample the exhaust gases pre-catalytic converter. Super convenient. Unfortunately, 430s are not equipped with those. There are a couple boss ports or bungs on the exhaust. You can see right up there next to the O2 sensor. But I do steer away from removing those because more times than not, the threads will gall up and then you just created a whole lot more work for yourself than by not doing it. So unfortunately, we really don't have that great of access to get right up into the manifolds. Not as big of a deal for the smoke test, but it's less than ideal for the emissions test. So my solution is just to go right in through the tailpipe. So I have the tailpipes plugged with some rags. I just have my hose stuffed in there. It's pretty crude and down and dirty, but effective and works. And I plug them on both sides. We have our machine hooked up, so we're just going to turn this guy on, get our flow going. And you will see right here, we already have just a little bit of smoke leaking out. That is okay because that's our rags. I'm not going to sweat it. But we're just going to give it a couple minutes and we're going to check the system for any smoke leaking out. Now you will see a little bit of smoke if you look carefully coming out right there. That's coming out from this valve on this exhaust bypass. Also note, I'm on the outer tailpipe, which routes in and is actually this rear pipe right here, so we're not worrying about these valves, although they're unplugged and open all the time. So we're just going to give this a couple minutes. Like I mentioned, it's going to leak a little bit out of that shaft for the valve. That's normal. You might see a little bit leaking out of some of the slip joints because this car is cold and the exhaust is not expanded. It will intermix inside the muffler, so you will see some of the same thing over here on this side. You can see some of that smoke coming out, which is convenient, meaning I only have to run this test on one side. But really what we're looking for is up here on the header. So we're just looking for any whispers of smoke coming out, primarily along the gap where the header kind of runs along the side of the head. They're encapsulated in that heat shield, so if there's a cracked pipe in the header, it's going to leak out of the edges of the heat shield, not necessarily where the cracked pipe is at. And we can check our connection right up there to the catalytic converter and just kind of get a good visual look. So I usually just take kind of a high level glance up here and I look for any smoke. And if I start finding traces of smoke, I start getting a little bit deeper into it, looking, taking a peek from the bottom side. But if you have a sealed system that's tight, you don't see any smoke from the top side and you know you're set. And now I've already ran this one a little bit and I can tell you that it's sealed tight. Both of his manifolds are good. There's no leaks, which is excellent news for him. But it is something that you definitely, absolutely want to have checked. And honestly, like I said, the only way I know of checking this is with the smoke machine. Definitely worth having that done. It doesn't take very long at all. Now, I did mention, or I should say, a common failure point of 430s are the intake manifold gaskets. So I'm going to disconnect my smoke machine from the exhaust. I'm going to come up here and get onto one of those vent lines right here. I'm going to hook my smoke machine up to the intake manifold and I'm going to run that smoke test on the intake, then to be sure that my intake gasket is still good. Some people use brake clean on that. I try to steer away from that because spraying brake clean on a hot running engine, not my favorite thing, especially these engines because they run a lot hotter and it's pretty easy for that brake clean to ignite. So we're just going to run a smoke test. It's the smarter, safer way, and check the integrity of those gaskets. I will say that I've actually had one of those gaskets suck in on me on a test drive. Is what happens is if you have the car at a high RPM, you do a downshift on deceleration, all of the vacuum in the engine actually pulls the intake gasket inward, it tears it in half, and you have a vacuum leak. So it is a pretty common problem, worth checking while we're here. So for the intake manifold, you can see that I just loosened that ear clamp, stuck it right up there on the manifold, and again, we're just looking for whispers of smoke up here to investigate any deeper. I know the intake is filled because it's getting past the throttle body and we have a slight leak right there, which is okay because it's before the airflow meter. So it's certainly not ideal, but it's not going to cause any drivability issues because it's not metered air just yet. If it's post airflow meter, between the airflow meter and engine, that's where there's a problem. I had that air filter box off because I was checking the condition of the air filter, so I left that off so I can see if it's getting through the other side of the plenum and coming out over there. There is the valve right here that rotates this barrel valve inside the plenum so they mix. So I was operating that to make sure I get it across both sides of the plenum because we want to check bank 1 as well as bank 2. And I can tell you that, well, we have an open intake and exhaust valve over here, so we have a cylinder on overlap, so that's where most all of our smoke is actually going. But these little whispers up here are good signs because that's telling me I have enough smoke in the manifold if it's getting this far leaking out, and that I don't have any leaks coming from right up where the intake manifold meets the head. That's really what we're checking and looking for right here. So this one's sealed tight, looking good. So it passes another test. On to the next one. So the next thing on the list to do is we're going to run an emissions test on the car. Now, we already discussed that I don't have the pre-catalytic converter emissions test ports on a 430, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to sample the emissions or the exhaust gases from the sniffer that goes into the tailpipe. So it's going to be post-catalytic converter. It's not as ideal as pre-catalytic converter, and it kind of, we have like a buffer, or you got to think the catalytic converter is in there altering the exhaust gases or the emissions gases. So we're not getting a true reading, but it's worth doing. We're here. And again, we're getting a baseline. We want to be sure everything's fine. So the car is cold. I'm going to have to fire it up, let it warm up. I got my 5-gas analyzer here. It is warming up and getting ready to go. So once the car is warm and up the temperature, I'm going to pull a reading at both idle and 3,000 RPM. So we ran the emissions test, and honestly, the results were pretty much what I was expecting. Since we're measuring post-catalytic converter, we're only really going to have a couple gases that are actually measurable. You know, my analyzer is a 5-gas, so I'm actually able to read the air-fuel ratio. We had a little bit of CO2, a little bit of NOx, really no hydrocarbons because the cat's cleaning everything up. But it's just a good, quick, easy check. The whole purpose of this inspection that we're doing to the car is to inspect and verify the condition of the car, not make any assumptions. So even though the emissions test doesn't garner a lot of great information, we don't have to make assumptions on what the emissions are doing. We measured and checked. Which brings us to the next check, and that's going to be a compression test. Yet, once again, electronically, we have no indications that the car has any kind of engine issues with the engine. We drove the car, again, no indications of any issues with the engine. The car idles great, sounds great, so everything's telling us that this engine is great and healthy. However, the whole point of this inspection is to verify, not assume, so we're going to run through a compression test on the car. Now, there is a couple things that I want to talk about on the compression test before I jump into it. One of those is I have my stabilized power supply is still hooked up to the car, so that is not a battery charger. That actually is a stabilized supply that provides a constant 13 volts at, I think, 55 amps. So I keep that on there as we're rotating the engine over. I'm essentially running off of that power supply unit, not the battery on the car. That way I can verify that each time I crank the car over for each cylinder, I'm not draining the battery where the starter's starting to slow down because my voltage drops, which would affect our readings. So consistency is key. Another thing I like to do is I like to hold the throttles wide open on a car. It's not as critical on this because we have such big plenums on it, but a lot of the cars, older cars that have individual throttle bodies, or say a carbureted car where specifically on Ferrari, each barrel of the carburetor feeds just one runner to the engine. There's really no common plenum. That can really affect your compression test results if you have the throttles closed. So I like to hold those open. Usually I use a prop rod in the car to hold them open. However, a 430 uses electronic throttles, so in order for me to hold the throttles open, I'd have to have the key on, which isn't a big deal, but then I'll be cranking the car over with my coils unplugged, and honestly, I just don't like doing that. It doesn't make that much sense for me. So I always have a remote switch back here so I can do my compression test and not have to crank the car. And you can see that I just loosen the ear clamp right here for the throttle, and it doesn't take a lot. Just loosen a little bit, and you can see that I move the whole rubber boot off, and I have both plenums up and open, and that works around my problem with having free flow, airflow going into the plenum, so there's no restriction with a closed throttle, and I don't have to worry about doing this with the key on, causing any faults or any issues. It's not as critical on a 430. However, on the newer Ferraris that use the Eldor ion system, you can actually cause a lot of problems with having the key on, cranking the car over with coils unplugged. So it's something that I just stay away from in general. I have this just hooked up to the starter, which is very easy to do because the under trays are off. So I have that set up. Everything's going to be consistent, good equal reading. Set you guys down. We're going to work through this compression test, and then after that, I'm going to walk you guys through this car, show you kind of what I found, but also show you areas you need to look for on your 430. $175. Need to write that down. All right, cylinder 2. $175. Cylinder 3. $175. Cylinder 4. $175. Cylinder 5. $175. This thing's looking pretty good. Let's see if we can finish the last 3 out at $175. Cylinder 6. $175. Cylinder 7. $175 again. And finally, cylinder 8. $175. Looks like I lost my starter switch. Well, it looks like my remote starter switch fell off the starter right on the end of cylinder 8, but we still registered 175, which is strong. This engine is dead equal across all 8 cylinders, which is absolutely excellent and great news. So, let me drop you guys in and show you some other areas that you should be paying attention to when you're inspecting or looking to buy a 430. Since we have the car down low, we'll just get started up here at the front of the car. We'll cover as much as I can on the exterior of the car, the interior, and the top of the engine bay, and then I'll get the car raised up and we'll talk about some of the things to look for on the, in the suspension and the wheelhouse and also underneath the car. So up here, there's not a whole lot to cover. One thing I will say is you want to have your brake fluid measured, or the moisture content of that measured. There's different methods to do so. I use a digital gauge, and really is what you want to see is you want to see below 2%. Ideally, you want to see 0% moisture in that brake fluid. That's a great indication of how well the car has been maintained and serviced. The brake fluid should be replaced every 2 years, no matter if the car is driven or not. It doesn't matter on mileage. The brake fluid can actually start to pull moisture in from the atmosphere through this closed system and get into the lines, and it really causes a lot of problems in the long run. So anything with a high moisture content with dark, dirty fluid, and if it's still there, that means it's either been neglected or the car's seen a lot of extreme use in environments, either track use or it's near a really moist environment where it pulled in that moisture. So definitely have that checked, because like I mentioned, that causes problems with the ABS unit, the brake lines, calipers, master cylinder, and just want to stay away from stuff like that. A very common problem on 430s are loose mirrors, and if you look right here on this one, you can see I have just a little bit of wiggle. So if we drop down underneath here, you can see there's 3 T20 Torx. You remove those 3 T20 Torx, and then you can basically pull this mirror off the mounts right here. There's still going to be the wiring for the motor that's in there, so you have to be really careful to hold the mirror so you don't hit anything and scratch the paint. But there is a piece of plastic that screws to this mirror housing that those T20 Torx screw into. That is held onto the housing with 3 Phillips head screws, and those loosen up. That causes the play. So that's a very common thing. It's actually a very quick and easy fix. It only takes a couple minutes to get that mirror popped off, everything tightened back up, and put back on. In this particular case on this car, I'm just going to take care of that for the client because the car's in the shop. Because it's so quick and easy, there's no reason not to. Now we're jumping over, take a peek at the interior. I've already mentioned it, sticky no more. All the sticky items with all this finish up here like on these rings. Incredibly common. I pretty much expect any car of this era to have that unless it's already had the stuff refinished. This particular car has several items that are getting sticky. It looks like there's a few items, like say the ashtray lid, that have been addressed. So potentially the previous owners kind of pick and chose certain items that get fixed, maybe the high-touch items, and they haven't done the entire car. Now, I will say that getting that stuff done, it is quite expensive to have it refinished, and there's multiple companies out there that do refinish the service. My personal preference is Sticky RX. I feel that they are superior to the others out there, and the main reason on that is their finish is very clean and uniform and a very aesthetically appealing. I like the finish, but the main thing is where all the graphics are on them, like that arrow. Well, some of the companies actually just use stickers on them, which is not how they were from the factory, and Sticky RX laser etches them in there, which is the correct way to do it. Obviously a big investment on their end to do that, but I feel that is the proper way, and that is my preferred company of choice for the Sticky No More. So other items to note, which is all typical Ferrari stuff, would be bubbling leather or shrinking leather on the dash and door panels, which this car does not exhibit any of that of. All this leather is in very good shape. And overall, the interior of this car is in great shape. There's really nothing else that comes to mind to really keep an eye out for here. In the interior, it's really Sticky No More leather condition. Now, this car is a Spider, so there's a slew of different problems that you'll see on these convertible tops of the Spiders. This top, when it's closed, it's in great condition. I would say most of the problems I see with the top folding are really attributed to the back glass and the plastic window, and it has a tendency to want to fold inward, like so, when you're closing the top or stowing the top, and that's the wrong direction. You want to have the plastic fold backwards while you're folding everything, and that fold can change the stack height of everything back here, which limits the tonneau from getting fully closed. So if it's not folding the right way, you can reach back there, push it in the right direction, mid-cycle, complete the cycle, and you're good. But for the most part, the convertible top system is pretty robust unless someone's really been in there monkeying with a lot of things. Continuing back here on the body. So, taillights, 430, probably a pretty known common problem, but the mounts break and the taillights have a loose wiggle to them. So you just want to check all the taillights. These are all tight and they're not broken. So these taillights are bolted in with 3 little mounts, and the plastic on them breaks from the body and allows them to wiggle. I think now, I haven't had a chance to use them, but it looks like there's people on the market that make 3D printed adapters that you can bolt onto the taillight that rectify that issue if you have a broken mount, where you don't have to replace the taillight. So I've never had experience with them. I probably will give them a shot next time I see one with a broken taillight, but that is a pretty common problem on the 430s. Oh, drop down here, the exhaust. So these exhaust tips, factory exhaust tips, you can see it has this outer tip here and this inner tip right there. I've actually had the spot welds that hold this outer tip on break, which causes this piece, the rattle on this piece, and it's really hard to spot and find. Spot welds are right down here on the bottom. I don't know if I can get the camera in there and show you, but I can feel them right under there. And also, it's not just the spot weld here, there's little brackets that they basically mount on in there, and those internal welds break. So that is something I've had on a couple cars, and you can hear it driving the car with the windows down, just a little bit of vibration. So I always make a check of these and make sure they're not loose and rattling. And on this car, everything's nice and tight. So just one more thing to check on these cars, and really a lot of these things I'm talking about aren't going to be deal breakers when you're looking over a car, but there are a lot of little nuisance things or little things that you may not catch right away when you're looking at the car that could cause a problem or a rattle or noise or something that, you know, is not ideal for your ownership. I think for the most part, besides obvious body and paint and seals, that kind of stuff's all a given. I think that covers it back here. So we'll jump back into the engine bay, and there's a few things to talk about up here, although let me grab a light. So from the top side we'll talk, and if you look right back there, I'm looking at the valve cover. Let me see if I can get you guys zoomed in. You can see that we have some signs of seepage back there on the valve cover where it's kind of getting dirty, so that's definitely not leaking, so to say, but starting to show signs of a leak or a seep. Now, valve cover gaskets on a 430, again, a pretty common thing. It's a rubber one-piece perimeter gasket. They do start to leak over time. The rubber gets hard and brittle and start to kind of lose its ability to seal. So that's a pretty common item. These ones aren't too terrible. It really comes down to the customer's preference on when they get them replaced. I will say everyone has a different tolerance of what they constitute as a leak, whether a seep. So some people don't view it as a leak until it's fully dripping. It's a seep. It's subjective, right? So I took good pictures of it. I'll talk to the customer, show him the pictures, and depending on how he decides to use the car, how long he plans to own it, service it, we'll let that dictate when he decides to address that problem, if he does. They're really not too bad on this particular car, but they're getting there. Another common thing up here, I'll try to get you guys in. If you look right here where my finger is, that is our connector for our intake variator solenoid. There's one down here for the exhaust. It's covered by this cross brace. Now, you might see a bunch of wetness and oil leaking out of this connector, and that is because, well, the oil wicks through the solenoid, through the wires, out through the pins of the connector, and starts to leak out here and may leave a wet spot. So, kind of might seem as a bit of an unusual problem, but I actually had my experience with BMW. We had similar problems with thermostats doing that, where it would actually wick coolant through the wire harness and get in and short out the ECU through the wire harness for the thermostat. That's not really something that you have to chase after and address or fix. I've not had any component failure or operational issues with that. But if you see oil residue up there and oil leaking out of the connector, that's where it's coming from. Ferrari did specify for us to apply a specific grease into that connector, which I'm thinking is probably their thought to try to slow down that oil leak or prevent it from happening. But, I mean, that's kind of a band-aid fix in my opinion. As I mentioned, I've never seen it cause an issue with the functionality of the variator. It just causes a little bit of a leak and a little bit of a mess. Kind of a pricey repair if you want to go in and throw in new solenoids. You got to pull the valve cover off to do so. I'm just noting or talking about this, so if you see that oil up there, that is where it's coming from. That is why it's doing that. We did talk about manifolds. I think that's well known, well established on 430s, having the manifolds crack, leak, and fail. So that's pretty common. Speaking of the exhaust, we have our muffler back here, and you can see all this white powder right here. And if you could see this car in person, you'd see that there's a lot of like what looks to be fiberglass dust in the engine bay. That white powder is that dust that you see in the engine bay. You can actually see it up on that valve cover where it's starting to leak. It's starting to attach on there quite a bit. That is actually the fiberglass insulation from this muffler where it's starting to break down over time, and then it vibrates and works itself out. You can see this dust. If I take my finger, I can wipe it off, and it just makes a mess. So that's not an indication of a failed muffler. It's just messy. And if you've ever wondered where that dust is coming from for your 430, there you have it. It's coming from that. Really, from the top side, we did mention it. We checked intake manifold gaskets. That's another thing to keep an eye out for. Very common on these cars. That'll cause either a misfire or the engine to run lean, where you get check engine lights for your air-fuel ratio. Your additive and multiplicative values will be out of spec. So definitely check the integrity of your intake gaskets. And I think with that, that covers most everything up here on the top side. So let's get the car raised up and we'll talk about the brakes a little bit. All right, so the car is up in the air. Let's take a minute and talk about these carbon ceramic brakes. Since this is an 08, it's equipped with the factory carbon ceramics, and we kind of covered it a little bit where you need to use the tester to read out the wear percentage in the instrument cluster. And when you put new rotors on the car, you do reset that wear percentage. So it's not like a traditional steel rotor where you measure the thickness of the rotor. And actually on some of these carbon ceramics, you'll actually take them off, extensively clean them, blow all the dust out of the holes, all the vents, everything. and you actually weigh them, and the weight of the rotor determines if the rotor needs to be replaced or not. But really, the true tale of rotor wear and the need to replace them is the wear percentage in the instrument cluster. So it's critical to have the right tools so you can read that out. However, there is, you can get a rough idea of the shape of or condition of these rotors visually. So we're up here at the front of the car looking at the rotor, and I'm hoping you guys can see it. But you can see this finish. It's pretty smooth with my hand, and it's pretty shiny. And you can see where it looks like there's sections that have open pores. Is what we want to see is, for the most part, a very shiny, clean rotor. This one, like I said, this car has 18,000 miles, and I would say what I'm seeing on this rotor matches what I'd expect to see for the 10% wear we read out of the cluster. Now let's go to the rear rotor, and if we take a look at it, you can see that it's not as shiny, and it looks like it has more of those open pores in it. So this rotor, although it doesn't indicate on the cluster, has seen a little bit more wear. It's counterintuitive, right? The rear rotor is showing a little bit more wear than the front. That's generally backwards from what you'd expect to see. You'd want to see the front rotor taking out the load. So the reason why I would expect to see more rotor wear on the rear versus the front on a Ferrari really comes down to the stability control, or to be very specific, the traction control, right? So when you're accelerating the car, depending on the Manettino setting, it has different phases. And I think most road-going production cars, if you start to spin the cars, the traction control cuts in and it cuts the throttle, and it's very abrupt, so you can actually feel it, and it like cuts all the power out of the car. You lose all your forward momentum. It stops the wheel from spinning, and you drive on. It's not very fun. It's very intrusive, and it doesn't really enhance the driving experience. It takes away from it. Well, Ferrari really takes it to the next level, and I really think that this is kind of something that they don't get enough credit for. And depending on the Manettino setting you have it set at, the car will not do that. So it is very hard to get one of these cars to cut power when you're losing traction at the rear. What it's going to do is it's still going to allow you to have full power from the engine, and if it senses that you're starting to lose traction, it actually runs the ABS pump, starts applying pressure to the rear brakes to slow the wheels down, so that way you don't spin the tires, and it's unnoticeable to the driver. There's no warning light in the dash, and they can't really feel it. Essentially, when you're flooring it from low speed and you have low traction, you're not getting all your power because your rear brakes are back here dragging on your rotors, slowing you down. So it's not really that big of a deal on 430s because they're right around the 500 horsepower mark. Same thing for the 458s. They're not really overpowering the tire as much. You get into the 488s, so all the twin turbo Ferraris, and those things are hard on the rear rotors, and the driver doesn't even know. So they're getting on it, and those cars have so much torque, so much power, they're just going to be overpowering the rear tires. But if they have it in sport mode, ABS pump, it's scrubbing speed, it's wearing on your rear rotors, and like I said, it's imperceivable to the driver. So we're going to see a little bit more back there. It doesn't mean that there's a problem. It honestly is, I'd say it's normal, but that is the reason why we don't have the same visual appearance to the front rotors. Now, let me take you to an extreme example right here. Set this over here in the light, and you can see this rotor. Now this rotor has pretty much lived and been beaten on the track, and you can see how open and porous these are and rough this is. So this rotor is pretty much well beyond its life, and you can just see the difference where it's very worn, very beaten, and yeah, seen better days. So this is a definitely extreme example, and that's why I'm showing you guys, to show you a very worn out rotor versus a typical street driven rotor. And I think actually, let me go check and see, because I think I have a virtually brand new rotor that I can show you. I found it. So you can see here, virtually a brand new rotor, and you can actually just see the reflection in the light right here versus this rotor, the big difference. So you want to see that nice shiny rotor. That means it's lived a nice easy life and hasn't been beaten on too much, and there's really not too much rotor wear in it, versus one that's seen a lot of track time. So again, the wear rating in the instrument cluster is the end all be all on the rotor wear, but this visual difference right here gives you a great indication, or it's a real easy peek when the wheels are on the car and it's on the ground, of how much hard driving and specifically hard braking the car has seen. So let's start taking a peek underneath the car, and right away you can see this car is equipped with aftermarket skid plates, which is definitely a perk. So that way you kind of have a disposable or wearable item on low entrances. You don't have to worry about damaging your bumper. But you can see I have the front under tray off. we have our brake inlet ducts. We have our radiator sitting right there. There's one on each side, our other radiator up there. And really this is our little pocket of access. It's not a whole lot of space, but you can see we have our power steering lines, our AC lines, our radiator pipes that all run to the back of the car. Everything's kind of crammed up there. We have our auxiliary water pump up here. And really when you're up under here, it's just a pretty easy visual inspection. You just want to make sure that there's nothing leaking. Sometimes these clamps do loosen up and they leak a little bit, so you can just come back, tighten those clamps, and you don't have a leak right up there. So just a quick visual. Obviously this is the floor tub of the car, part of the unibody, so want to make sure there's no damage, no impacts, and just really no unusual funky items. And over to the suspension. So our suspension is pretty standard. You're going to shake it down, make sure you don't have any loose ball joints, make sure you don't have any loose tie rod ends, make sure your boots are in good shape, sway bar and leaks, control arm bushings, all standard stuff, right? And that's stuff I've already done. Now, I would say that typically I'm pretty binary on the condition of suspension components, meaning it's either good or it's bad. So if I have play in it, it's bad. If there's no play, everything's tight, it's good. However, on the 430 and 360, specifically at these ball joints, I have to deviate a little bit. So these are pressed in and glued into the control arms, but they are replaceable separately. However, I can't be so binary with them. So let me go grab a pry bar and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so you can see I got a pry bar and I'm just going to slide it right up in between the knuckle and the control arm. And I'm going to try to do this with two hands so you guys can see. But I can move this pry bar, and I hope I can hold this camera steady enough. Let me try. Right there. So you can see that I can move the pry bar and I can feel just a little bit of movement in that ball joint and that control arm. So, like I was mentioning, traditionally I'm very binary. If I have play in a ball joint, it needs a new ball joint. 430 and 360. This is a gray area. That play is normal, as in pretty much every car is going to have that play. Now, it's unusual because if I install a brand new ball joint, that play is not going to be present. So that would make you think, man, okay, so that play shouldn't be there and that's a wearing ball joint. However, you install a brand new ball joint and you put 5-6 miles in the car, the play is present. So it's just the slightest amount of play, and when I shake the suspension down on the wheel here at the car, you cannot feel it. The only way you can feel that play is with a pry bar. The slightest amount of play, just where I had the pry bar and moved it just a little bit, I constitute that as normal. So I have to deviate on these cars. I don't get into recommending the replacement of ball joints until it's grossly loose, or when I'm driving the car, you hit bumps and you can actually hear start the rattle on sharp movements up and down where it actually sounds like you have a loose shock kind of pounding the chassis of the car. That's when I really get into quoting them, because if I were to quote every ball joint that had that slight amount of play in it, I would just be selling more ball joints than they actually need. And again, I'm just wasting money, because after the car sees a little bit of mileage, the play is going to be present in the new ball joints, and there was no benefit gained, and I wasted the client's money. So that is the one area where I can't be so black and white and binary on it, and you kind of just have to have a little bit of a feel to say, yep, that's the normal play, or oh, that's excessive, we should address it. It's kind of the same. It's essentially like the same style setup ball joint on the rear of the car as well, so that is one thing to just keep in mind. It's a little bit different, and well, you have to use a little bit of discretion on those. Alright, so I shifted you guys around to the rear of the car, and the early 430s when they first came out had a slew of problems with these tailpipes. They've had recalls, they updated them, the tailpipes are cracking and these mounts are cracking. These exhaust mounts are a known problem on 430s. There's a lot of theories why it's a problem. Really, you have to think that the headers are fixed to the engine, fixed to the catalytic converter, it's all fixed to the gearbox, and there's really not much room to allow for expansion. So everything kind of gets bound up, and then with the vibration causes cracks. So these mounts are very common to have crack. And actually, if we come over to this one, you have to look carefully, but you can see that little rust right there. There's a crack. So that crack's actually going to get pretty worse. Now that I'm looking here at the light, you can actually see where it's spreading into that other weld over there. And that is a very common problem, and you have to inspect those very carefully. Again, once they fully crack, they just cause a rattle, so it's not a huge deal, and it's easy enough to replace the factory parts. There is a bunch of different options out there aftermarket-wise on different ways to mount and hold this rear muffler with different ideas and solutions to prevent and eliminate that problem. So it's really your choice if you want to go back with a factory part and leave the car completely factory and original, or if you want to try one of those upgraded solutions. Really the owner's preference. So other things we need to look at while we're down here is, I'll try to get the camera up there. I'm spying up and in. That is our trans mount, or the bushing, so you want to make sure there's no cracking or separation on that. And also up here you have your engine mounts. Again, the same thing, no cracking, no separation, and you want to make sure that those pads right there where the mount hasn't sagged and allows that pad to sit on the subframe. You can see under here we have a great view of the manifold and header, and you can see that this one, which I found odd and it's the first time I've seen it, someone sealed this one up with an orange silicone. So we've already smoke tested them. We know they're not leaking, which is good. But that's an indication that either this car has had manifolds put on it, or maybe they had one to break a stud and pop off and warp. But it's fixed. I don't know if I necessarily would have used that silicone, but I see no problem with it still being there. They're sealing up and there's no problems. But I did mention is what you'll see is you'll see these studs break. So it'll be missing the stud and the nut, and then that allows the manifold to pull away from the head. And then depending on how long it's been that way, it'll warp this flange, and then you have a leak here at the junction. So you can remove this manifold. You should be able to have a machine shop remachine this flange all the way down. You can drill out the stud, get a new stud in, put it back together, and that fixes your problem. You can kind of see under here a little bit what I was talking about with the valve cover starting to leak. So these ones aren't dripping. I would say they're just starting to seep. So they're not really that big of a deal right now, but we'll kind of note it to the client and let him make his decision on what he sees as the best for the car. We talked about the clutch wear. So that causes, a worn clutch can cause a lot of problems with the F1 transmission with it shifting and everything. So that is just one thing to be aware of. You know, it's pretty expensive with you count the labor to remove the transmission, replace the pressure plate, the flywheel, the clutch, the throwout bearing, the F1 sensor, or the clutch sensor. There's a lot there to it. So it's definitely one thing you want to check, and it is a big expense. This car right here, underneath this heat shield, actually, if you can see right up under, right there, since this car is a 2008, it has the SoFast 3, which is the CF301 trans ECU. So essentially the 2008 430 and up, that is a clutch pressure sensor, which is watching the pressure of the clutch hydraulic fluid. Essentially, that is monitoring the clutch engagement, kind of like what you would do with your foot as you're driving the car with the clutch pedal. So it can essentially watch the engine RPM, gearbox RPM, the clutch pressure plate position, and then the pressure on the hydraulic circuit, and it gives the ECU a much better idea of what the clutch is actually doing, and it allows a much better engagement of the clutch when you're first driving away. In my opinion, it makes a dramatic difference, and these cars drive a lot nicer than the earlier F1 cars. Really to the point to where the newer cars with this system, I really don't have any complaints with the F1 system at all if it has the clutch pressure sensor. So the CF301 cars. Really, if you're looking for a 430 and you're not fixed on certain things, I really prefer the 08 and newer because they have obviously the better clutch pressure sensor. They come with the carbon ceramics. Just that is my preference. So I wouldn't say that getting an 08 newer car for that clutch pressure sensor is really like a must-have. But it is a nice little perk, and if you're like trying to decide between two cars, it could be the deciding factor. Now, if you're looking to buy a car and convert it to a stick shift, then I guess it doesn't really matter because you don't need that clutch pressure sensor. You don't have an ECU deciding how they engage the clutch. You're going to be deciding how they engage the clutch. But we're here, might as well talk about it. So, a couple other things to talk about while we're down here. And you can see right here is our oil water pump. So, we've talked about it before, but all of our oil is stored in the sump of the transmission. So this is our oil tank effectively right here and is the casing for the transmission. Our feed for our oil comes in to our oil water pump right here. Our 3 stages of our dry sump pump right there. It's ran in through a shaft up here, and this is our water pump, and it's all driven up here off the front of the engine. So these leak. And really, you can see right here, this is like your weep hole for your water pump, and you can see that there's just a little bit of residual for the coolant up there. Now, these water pumps, they have a pretty unusual seal, and it's a ceramic seal that rides in there. So It's pretty common setup on most newer Ferraris at this water pump and that seal. And honestly, if the car sits for a long time and it's not driven, it'll actually start to create that leak. So having the car sit stationary without heat cycles and having that seal continuously wear in and keep moving results in that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this one needs to be replaced. This car, I'm doing the inspection. The client just bought it. I can see that there's cobwebs on the car. I see all the signs and evidence that it has been sitting for a while. It has older tires on it, so that's all fine. It just tells me that this car's probably been sitting. And knowing that, that seal starts to kind of develop a drip when the car sits, that kind of matches with what I'm seeing right here. Now, I did have the coolant pressure tester on the car for quite a while, and I had no pressure drop in coolant, and I had no leaks coming out of this. So we're just going to note this and really keep an eye on it. So when the car comes back in for its oil change or service or any other work, we're going to keep an eye on this. I'm going to document it with a picture, and it's just something to note. Now, these oil water pumps, you can replace them completely, or you can rebuild them individually. So you have to take the whole thing apart, replace all the seals, and put them back together. So it's a little bit pricey of a repair, but it is just one thing to keep an eye of. And these can get a lot worse and start leaking much worse than they are here. There's also a seal in the front where if that leaks, it's going to start coming out of this weep hole here. So this section would be leaking coolant, and then these are just basic rubber O-rings, and it can be leaking oil from back here where the junction where it bolts onto the block. And I don't think there's any way I'm going to show you, but there's 3 more of these up top behind that engine mount. You can't even see it. So you have to pull the engine mount out in order to get that pump off. So those could leak as well, and that's another area to keep an eye of. Now, one of the most common problems on a 430. We're going to get up here in the front of the engine. See if I can squeeze you guys in. We're on the driver's side, and get you up there with my light. And we're kind of right below the power steering pump. Let me zoom you in right there. So you can see we have a lot of dirt, a lot of buildup, and a lot of grime, and that is right on the corner of the timing cover to the cylinder head and the block. And might be able to get over, you can see a little bit of grease and dirt there. That's the bottom of the power steering pump. So this is very tight. We don't have a lot of space. You can see it right up there. That's a good view. So you can see that, there we go. So you can see that it's definitely, it's dirty. So there's really a lot of dirt, debris. A lot of that's coming from the dust from the belt getting whipped up, and that's creating that to where it's not really dripping oil, but you can tell by the amount of grime that's accumulating there, there is something leaking there. Now, you can come over here and take a peek on the right-hand side, and this side's clean. We don't have anything over here. So those are common leak points, but that's really not a simple black and white thing. So that could be a combination of things. On the left hand side, we have a power steering pump. So that could be the hose that goes onto the power steering pump, and we could tighten that down, and it could just be seeping out power steering fluid. Then all the dust and dirt and debris from the belts accumulating there, making it look much worse than it is. Or a lot of people may reference that it's a timing cover gasket leak, and it could be a timing cover gasket leak, but it's actually a deeper problem than that. At the end of the head gasket on this era of engine, and it's also the same on the V12, so the chain-driven V12s, there is a small little piece of red silicone at the very tip of the gasket, right where that meets the junction of the timing cover. That little piece of silicone dislodges, and then that's actually where the leak comes from. And since it's right at the junction where the timing cover is, it looks like it's a timing cover gasket leak. So there's different approaches to this repair, because in my opinion, the real problem is that piece of silicone on the head gasket. Once it becomes loose, it starts to leak, and it's really not the timing cover gasket. So we could pull the timing cover gasket, which we can do with the engine in the car. We have to pull the interior out. There is the access panel, and we can work from the combination of the top, the bottom, and inside the car. And we can replace the timing cover gasket on a 430 with the engine in the car. Now, like I mentioned, I feel that that red piece of silicone is the true root cause of this problem. So when you get there, you can try to leave that silicone there, clean everything up, get it brake cleaned, repack it with some silicone, put a new timing cover gasket on it, put it back together, hope that it seals up. You also can go in, and sometimes that red piece of silicone comes off the head gasket free and clear, and the head gasket's still in there, Again, clean it with brake clean. It's hard because it's in a crack right in between the head and the block. Get that cleaned up, pack it with silicone, new timing cover gasket, reinstall it. Now I can tell you that I've had moderate success with that. So I've had that with some cars where it seemed to fix the problem, and I've had cars where it did not fix the problem and the leak persisted. At the end of the day, the proper fix would be a new head gasket where that piece of silicone is intact. That, on a 430, from what we saw up there leaking, is kind of outrageous. That's a pretty intrusive repair, a tremendous amount of labor, and it's kind of hard to justify, right? So I have had other cars where I've gone through and replaced a head gasket for that, but that's like on an Enzo. Completely different world. You got to think of the overall value and collectability of a car to where it's much more justifiable to have that car completely perfect than it is, say, a more common 430 or a car that someone's planning on driving. All of this, it's important to talk about because there's a bit of a leak up there. So the first thing to identify with the client is if that leak is worth chasing and going after. But you need to educate them and let them know that there is, like, the real problem is probably the head gasket. And even if I just said, hey, you need a timing cover gasket or you need to, tighten the hose in the power steering pump, he needs to understand that that may not fix it and why, and what the proper course of action is, and just kind of understand everything about it in the process so he can make the right judgment call. Because depending on what method you choose to do the repair on, you could get, say you sell a timing cover gasket, you leave the silicone there, it was slightly dislodged, you do your best to pack it with some fresh silicone, you brake clean it out, put the timing cover gasket on, and it starts to leak again. That's a hard conversation with the client when you've already told them it was going to get fixed, and then now it's still leaking, and they're expecting it to be fixed. So I think it's important to lay out why it leaks, the different options, and my opinion on what I think will be successful and what's sensible for this particular car, so they can make the right decision, so that way they know what to expect in the end. Now, on something like this car, since I can't really see in there well enough to know if that leak is coming from the power steering pump or the timing cover gasket or the head gasket, if the customer really wanted to chase after that, I would probably quote the time to pull the interior, pull the access panel, get all of that gunk cleaned off, pull the power steering pump, clean everything off, clean it from the bottom, get all of that residual out. That'd give me the opportunity to tighten the hoses on the power steering pump and make sure that they're not leaking. I would apply some leak trace powder on it, and then we'd run the car and monitor it and see if we could identify the exact source of that leak rather than just jumping into a potentially very expensive repair. So in this case, the oil, it's not dripping, it's not leaking, it's not getting on the ground. I'd say that is the very typical normal seepage and grime that you find in that location on a 430. But like I just described, it's not as simple as, oh, you have a timing cover leak. So you kind of have to invest the time. It could be a couple different things. And if it is coming from that head gasket, there's a couple different solutions. So I can tell you that I've had them where I've pulled that silicone out of the head gasket, and I've spent so much time cleaning that gap where that silicone went with brake clean, blowing it with air, brake clean, letting the car sit for a couple days, cleaning it, and then really working to pack more sealant in there to compensate for where that silicone was, and then putting a new timing cover gasket on there, and it still had a small seep, so it wasn't the ultimate fix. So it's not the best design. It's kind of frustrating to deal with, but really is what it is, and that's what we have to work with to fix. So I'm just trying to educate you guys on this, so that way if someone's telling you that that's leaking on your car, you can kind of see what I deem as, I would say, normal, as in almost all 430s are going to be like that, although it's not how it should be. Almost all of them are going to be that way, and your different avenues and paths of what you can do to rectify that problem. Well, guys, I'm peeking around under here trying to refresh myself, and I think that's really all of the main talking points that come to mind on a 430. I'm sure I'm probably missing a thing here or there. Maybe some other people have some different experience and key items to look at, but for the most part, those are probably your big, main, heavy items that you want to pay attention to. So really on a 430, the clutch, obviously, exhaust manifolds, those are your big ones. Leaking oil water pump, you want to pay attention to that. Suspension, ball joints. Sticky no more, that's a big one. Timing cover leak, again, we covered that in quite a bit of detail, so that one's very subjective. So you really just kind of have to choose your own adventure on that. Well, that's a pretty comprehensive inspection, pretty thorough look over of this car, and honestly, I'm very pleased with this car. This customer did have some reservations of buying this car without being able to get the inspection done beforehand, and I'm glad that I looked over the car and there's really nothing major at all on it. You know, his clutch wear is good, his rotor wear is good, all the common problems, the manifolds are good, so we have avoided the common problems, and the few things that we did find are pretty minor. So easy exhaust bracket, you know, that crack's so minor we can probably just keep an eye on it. Maybe the next oil change we'll see if it progresses, starts making some noise, and maybe replace it at that time. I found a couple lights that were inoperative, easy fix. Valve covers start in the seat, but we don't really necessarily need to address those just right now, but we will notice, that way he knows it's kind of coming down the road and he can choose when he wants to address it. Really, the biggest issue with this car, the one thing that kind of requires the most conversation, is that timing cover leak or power steering pump leak up on the front of the engine. Now, I will say that this particular car, we will be converting this car to a gated 6-speed. I already have all of the parts on order. I'm bringing this up because when I'm doing that work, I'm going to have most of the interior out of the car to gain access to do that conversion. So it might be worth it for the client at that time to spend a little bit of extra labor to have me remove the rest of the interior, get access to the front of the engine, maybe clean up all that oil around that power steering pump, check the hose, put trace powder on it, and that way we can keep an eye for down the road of what actually is leaking and have a much more accurate understanding of what's going on there, so that way we can determine what the proper path forward is. So I still have a lot of work ahead of me. I need to formulate a pretty big email. I have a lot of pictures and videos I need to compile for the client, a lot of information. I also need to put this car all the way back together and return it back to him. So I think I'm going to focus on getting this car put back together, and I think I'll see you guys here on the next video. You guys know the drill. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also get in the comment section to let me know what you thought. As always, guys, I appreciate your support. Thank you very much for watching the video, and we'll see you on the next one.